Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today we have entered day 150. Again, day 150, there, General Milley, of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And the reason, obviously, why I say General Milley is he had quoted the fall of Kiev within 72 hours. So obviously, again, an incredible, really lapse in analytical abilities by the Pentagon in this ongoing conflict, and especially in terms of future-facing issues in terms of how well the Ukrainian military would actually stand up against the Russian military forces. Now, today we are continuing to see very, very heavy fighting in the southwest of the area of operations. We can now call this a Ukrainian counteroffensive that is occurring in the southwest of the country. Now, is this an offensive that is going to dislodge Russian forces from the western bank of the Dnieper River? And I would have to say, in all probability, no. Now, there are some analysts that are stating that we could see Russia announce a goodwill gesture in which they would withdraw from the west bank of the Dnieper River. Now, obviously, that is not a goodwill gesture, and if that, in fact, were to occur, which, again, I am not saying that is going to happen. I do not believe that is going to happen at this stage. That obviously, if that were to occur, though, that would indicate a fairly significant military defeat for Russian forces in this ongoing operation. Now, the area where we're really looking at in terms of some of the most heaviest fighting is occurring not actually near Kherson, but further to the northeast in this locale here. So you see here you have a bit of a salient that has been created by Ukrainian forces. And allegedly, per Ukrainian reports, there are up to 3 Russian battalion tactical groups within the vicinity of this town and/or village, however you would like to define it. And right now, the Ukrainians are reporting that this battle grouping of those 3 battalion tactical groups of about 1,000 personnel have allegedly requested a green zone in order to pull out of this cauldron or this salient that was created in this limited Ukrainian offensive here further to the northeast. Now, does that mean that's going to collapse the entire Russian lines and allow Ukrainian forces to force a Russian withdrawal? No, I highly doubt that is going to occur. The Russian position, especially near Kherson, we now see 2 layers of defense networks being that the Russians have set up near Kherson. One obviously an outer layer, and then one a inner layer as you were to enter the city. And our understanding is the attacks on some of the bridge arteries that feed the Russian supply efforts into the Western Bank, and that's not the only recourse Russia has in terms of supplying its troops. If those 2 bridges were to be actually destroyed for some reason, if we do see the deployment of the ATACMS or something like that, and the Ukrainians are able to destroy those bridges, there are alternative means that the Russians have to supplying their forces. They still have the ability to supply with low-flying helicopters that can come in and they can bring in troops and supplies. Obviously, that negates some issues with heavier equipment, but generally speaking, they would still be able to supply their forces. And then the Russians obviously would also set up a pontoon bridge across the Dnieper River as well. So the idea that that would completely sever the Russian ability to supply its forces is not true in terms of what we are seeing on the ground. And then back up to the northeast. And again, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name of the town because I will get it wrong and I will hear about it in the comments section. And anyway, so 3 battalion tactical groups. They believe that there is a Russian tank battalion, a tank-heavy battalion tactical group, and 2 motorized rifle battalion tactical groups that are currently engaging Ukrainian forces in a fairly pitched battle that is occurring here in the northeast area of the battle zone. And right now we're watching that very closely. But obviously the Russians have reinforced the Kherson, or the west bank of the Dnieper River. We are continuing to see the Russians provide tactical airstrikes against Ukrainian forces. We are hearing, at least in terms of anecdotal reports on the ground, that while yes, the Ukrainians are maneuvering to the northeast, and then also launching artillery attacks upon Russian positions further to the south, where we're not seeing as much maneuver warfare as the Ukrainians is in the northeast. The Russians are negating that with its heavy artillery and its tactical air assets as well. If you look at this here, just do a measurement on the ruler. So you're about 41 kilometers, and again, I intentionally placed that point on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. So the Russians have the ability, and continue to have the ability, to have their multiple launch rocket systems, their long-range multiple launch rocket systems, that are being fielded on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, and have the ability to hit Ukrainian positions beyond Russian lines on the western bank. So obviously, yes, the Russians do have heavy artillery on the western bank, but they also have the capability of utilizing long-range rocket fires to hit. And I'm not talking about Grad type of rocket launchers. I'm talking about the bigger Uragan and Smerch type of systems and other systems that the Russians have that are being deployed against Ukrainian forces. But again, we're watching this very, very closely. Obviously, if the Ukrainians were to capture Russian forces, and we do see some sort of capitulation of those 3 Russian battalion tactical groups in the northeast, obviously that would be a media extravaganza for Ukrainian forces, and I would wager that you would see Russian prisoners of war being plastered all over Ukrainian TV. Now, if you don't see that, that means that, in fact, the Ukrainian operation was unsuccessful, and they were not able to eliminate those 3 battalion tactical groups. I believe at this point the Russians are going to reinforce and in all probability look to stifle that Ukrainian operation in the northeast. Now obviously that could change and things could go south for the Russians in the northeast. We just don't know what's going to happen as of yet. Now, with that being said, I want to try to put that into context a little bit. When you hear about the encirclement of 3 Russian battalion tactical groups, 1,000 personnel, and hypothetically, let's say that actually occurs, and those units, for whatever reason, surrender or are captured or what have you, or are simply defeated in zone. I mean, within the grand scheme of things, that is not a significant victory when you compare and contrast history. Okay, when you look back at history, we were seeing, especially in World War II, if you think about some of the envelopments, especially that occurred in the early stages of World War II, with the German operation into Russia. And some of the massive envelopment operations that occurred, in which we saw hundreds of thousands of Russian troops surrender en masse that had been surrounded and enveloped by German panzer armies. Obviously, when you compare and contrast that event to what's happening now, that would just be a mere drop in the bucket. So I guess what I'm trying to say is if that does occur in the Northeast, and you see the surrendering of 1,000 Russian soldiers, if you look at history, that is a very, 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 within the context of war, okay, that is something that is relatively insignificant. If you were to see, for instance, the entire west bank of the Kherson, what could become a Kherson pocket by Ukrainian forces, and the Ukrainian seas all of this, now that would be a little different. And is it possible? Who knows at this stage? But we're watching it very, very closely, and I just wanted to try and compare and contrast some previous points in history in which, again, going back to World War II, where you saw hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers surrender en masse. But ultimately, even after that defeat in World War II, in terms of some of those pockets and those pockets that collapsed with Russian forces in them, the ultimate outcome was not a German victory, and in fact, it was a devastating Russian victory against German forces. So, the Russian perseverance is something that you simply cannot discount. And obviously, are there going to be setbacks in military operations? Yes, absolutely. And at the same time, I have to say that for Ukrainian forces as well. Even the defeat that the Ukrainians suffered in the Lysychansk pocket that was created, and a large number of Ukrainian forces were taken prisoner, and that pocket completely collapsed over here. Again, the concept that has ended the Ukrainian will to fight is just something that is not present. I mean, neither side is talking, communicating, ceasefires or what have you. These two sides are locked in unbridled warfare right now, and we anticipate that will continue for some time. And at the same time, it does have the hallmarks of a civil war as well, which to a limited extent it is in fact that. That will not be portrayed in the mainstream media. It is more of a black and white. Russia is evil. Ukraine is good, and Russia invaded Ukraine. A little more complicated than that. Obviously, yes, Russia did invade Ukraine, but it's a little more gray than what some, especially Western sources, would indicate. And I highly recommend go back and look at the history, especially what happened in 2014 in terms of the Maidan, and especially the what occurred in the East as well. You have to understand the duly elected government of Ukraine was deposed from power by a Western backed mass movement that occurred. Now, did everybody support that mass movement? No, absolutely not. And it ended with significant portions of the eastern areas which did not support this Western mass movement in the West, in the capital, Kiev. And that's kind of how we have gotten to where we are. And again, it's much more complicated than the media would have you to believe. And you really, the viewer, are going to have to, if you're not educated on this topic, you are going to have to educate yourself and understand what is happening, and really look back throughout history of this region, and I mean going back into the Soviet Union and even prior to the Soviet Union as well. But we're also seeing the Ukrainians continue to mount stifling resistance in the east as well. Right now, very, very difficult for Russian forces to advance upon Sloviansk. There are anywhere between 2 and 3 defensive lines that have been set up by Ukrainian forces. And if we have a look at kind of what's going on, what is making this so challenging for Russian forces to advance on Sloviansk is, one, the terrain and the amount of Ukrainian forces that have been positioned around Sloviansk. So if you look at the terrain, obviously if Russian forces are moving kind of in this southeasterly direction towards Sloviansk, you have these terrain features. So you have hills and very forested areas that make up the approaches towards Sloviansk. And in between those, obviously, you have open areas with large bodies of retention ponds, lakes, and other terrain features that obviously are not conducive to armored warfare. So, in terms of a mechanized advance, Russian forces would have to proceed kind of down this gap in between these large forested areas, which are heavily defended by Ukrainian forces, utilizing anti-tank guided weapon systems in these areas. And so the Ukrainians have the Russians have a fairly narrow area in which they would have to move down to the southeast. And you look at that, it's 4.4 kilometer width, and they would have to come down this way and move towards the Ukrainian lines down a very narrow area that is relatively open, while facing Ukrainian forces operating in these heavily wooded areas, utilizing some of these more advanced anti-tank guided weapon systems, right, such as Javelin, such as the NLAW, and even the Brimstone has been deployed, and then the Ukrainians have their own weapon systems, their own anti-tank guided weapon systems as well, and that's right, again, from the left flank to the right flank, that is completely covered by these systems. So just a few of these teams could make it very difficult, and then even operating in what you could only define as hedgerows that run along these fields as well. So very difficult situation for the Russians to maneuver, especially in this modern era of the precision-guided strike capability of these small anti-tank guided weapons that just one individual soldier can put on his back and carry around, or place on an all-terrain vehicle with a couple of more soldiers providing reloads for said team, and obviously they have a multitude of those teams operating in these areas, and then also obviously very stifling lines of defense that have been set up as well across terrain features such as the river here, the Donets River, you can clearly see, and that's kind of what has really been a thorn in the Russian side in this ongoing operation, is conducting these bridging operations. And then to the east of Sloviansk, it's really kind of the same scenario. The Russians in the east would have to conduct a bridging operation across the Donets River, and that has proven to be very problematic for Russian forces. In this here, and you can see again, the whole front line runs along this Donets River, with hills on the western bank of the Donets River, in which the Ukrainian forces are very well dug in and resisting Russian forces. And in the east, near Seversk, this is really the area where you're seeing Russian forces trying to advance. Obviously, this is a bit more open, and they're trying to roll up the Ukrainian positions on the western bank of the Donets River by attacking east to west towards Seversk. It would appear that Ukrainian forces may be withdrawing finally from Seversk, and Russia could be very, very close to seizing control of this town. And but obviously the Ukrainians have further defensive preparations set up west of Seversk in multiple lines. Obviously the main line that runs along the Donets, and then within this locale here near Mykolaiv that kind of runs from north to south, and then quite possibly two additional lines, one of which actually is Sloviansk itself. So we anticipate that the Ukrainians would utilize Sloviansk as more or less a fortress city. And obviously the Russians, once they are ready to envelop Sloviansk, they are going to bombard Sloviansk into oblivion. So hopefully all the civilians are able to remove themselves from Sloviansk, and Kramatorsk will probably be the same as well. But the Russians are persistent. They are not going to stop this. And again, harken back to World War II and back to some of those dramatic military defeats that were seen in 1941, 42, and even obviously 43. But the Russians continued. They continued to fight and wear down the Germans until finally the German war machine collapsed, and that was it. And will we see something similar to what occurred during World War II in terms of Germany and versus Russia? I believe so. I believe we're on that course, and if the Russians have decided to continue on that course, they're going to continue. They're not going to stop. And it's going to be very, very difficult. Obviously, there are going to be setbacks. There's going to be lots of loss of life until whatever end occurs. But that's kind of what, in my view, at least, is going to happen. Just strictly from a military analytical viewpoint, and then obviously looking at history as well. But right now, all eyes are on the area on the western bank of the Dnieper around Kherson. It should be interesting to see what happens. I think the end game for this battle is going to really end with the Ukrainians seizing some territory, but ultimately, was it a action designed to create some sort of political win that ultimately degrades the Ukrainian defensive capability? Difficult to say. Obviously, if we see the Ukrainians seize the entire western bank of the Dnieper River, then we can then obviously there's going to be a reassessment, at least by myself, in terms of what we're seeing on the ground. Would it be a setback for Russians? Absolutely, probably more than a setback. But obviously that would cause a reassessment of the war, and we would absolutely do that if that were to occur. I don't think that's going to happen though, and ultimately, at least for the Ukrainian supporters and Ukraine, I fear that this offensive operation will probably end up degrading the Ukrainian military more than it actually helps it, if what we're seeing is in fact the case. But again, very difficult to ascertain until we see a final outcome on what is occurring in this area. But we'll continue to monitor, report, and obviously bring you more content for your consumption. Thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to leave comments in the comment section. I absolutely try to answer many of them. And if I don't, I just got busy and was unable to do so. Nothing personal. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.